Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change, simply because you said too much? Power lies in privacy, an idea that feels almost radical in today's world where everything is curated, posted, and broadcasted within seconds. We've been taught, often subconsciously, that transparency is virtue, that sharing every thought, feeling, and event makes us more relatable, more human, more real. But what if the opposite is true? What if holding something back, keeping part of yourself sacred and unseen, is where your real strength lies? In a world obsessed with oversharing, privacy has become a quiet rebellion. It's not about secrecy or shame. It's about discernment, because privacy doesn't mean you have something to hide. It means you have something to protect. You protect your peace, your power, your process. You protect your intentions, your dreams, your relationships from being pulled into the judgment of the crowd. Not everything needs to be explained, not every plan needs to be announced, and not every wound needs to be put on display for the sake of authenticity. There's a common misconception that being private is being cold or closed off. That couldn't be further from the truth. Privacy is not isolation, it's preservation. It's the decision to filter access to your life with the same care you'd give to something valuable. Would you leave your front door wide open and invite strangers in to roam through your bedroom, your closet, your journal? Then why do we do that with our emotional lives, our fears, our relationships? The truth is, the more people know about you, the more power they have. It doesn't matter how well-meaning they are. When too many eyes are on your life, the pressure to perform replaces the freedom to evolve. When you overshare, you don't just reveal, you relinquish. You give away little pieces of yourself, not realizing that those pieces in the wrong hands can be misunderstood, twisted, or used against you. Privacy keeps you in control of your own narrative. It allows you to respond rather than react. It creates a buffer between you and a world that often judges before it understands. What makes privacy so powerful is its ability to keep you rooted in self-awareness. You start making choices for yourself, not for validation or applause. You stop living performatively and start living intentionally. When you're private, your energy stops leaking into 1,000 empty spaces. You don't need to prove anything. You're not constantly explaining yourself. You don't need to win approval because you've already claimed your own. There's also something deeply attractive about mystery. Not in a manipulative way, but in a grounded, self-possessed way. When you're not constantly offering every detail of your life for public consumption, people lean in, they wonder, they listen more carefully. They respect boundaries. Silence, when intentional, speaks volumes. It says, I know who I am and I don't need your permission to be it. That's not arrogance, that's confidence with discipline. And discipline is exactly what privacy requires. It's easier to blurt out how we feel than to sit with those feelings. It's easier to vent online than to process offline. Privacy asks you to pause, to be intentional, to ask yourself, why am I sharing this? What am I hoping to gain? Is this something that strengthens me or exposes me? When you get honest with those questions, you begin to understand the difference between connection and attention. One builds you, the other drains you. We've glamorized openness to the point where people confuse being emotionally naked with being emotionally intelligent. But not every scar needs to be a story. Not every mistake needs to be a lesson broadcast to the world. Some things are meant to be held close. Some growth happens in silence, and that's okay. You don't owe your journey to anyone who hasn't earned the right to walk with you through it. The most powerful people in the world aren't the loudest. They're the ones who know when to speak and when to stay silent. They're the ones who understand the value of restraint in a culture addicted to exposure. Privacy gives you the space to evolve without pressure, to plan without interference, to love without spectacle, and that, in its quiet defiance, is what makes it powerful. Silence is a weapon, a quiet, unassuming force that can command more power than 1,000 spoken words. In a world addicted to noise, constant opinions, and rapid-fire responses, silence is often misunderstood. People equate silence with weakness, awkwardness, or submission, but silence, when used with intention, is anything but passive. It is deliberate, it is focused, it is strength disguised in stillness, and it can be more intimidating, more thought-provoking, and more strategic than any argument or outburst. There's a reason why the calmest person in the room is often the one most respected. They don't rush to speak because they don't need to. Their silence forces others to pay attention, to question, to fill in the blanks, and that space, the unknown, is where power begins. When you master silence, you don't just gain control over your words, you gain control over your energy. You stop reacting to every trigger, every insult, every challenge. You learn to observe, to analyze, and to respond only when it serves you, not when it serves your ego. Silence gives you time to think. It gives you the upper hand in conversations that might otherwise spiral into conflict. When you're silent, you're not just withholding speech, you're conserving energy, you're choosing your moment instead of being ruled by the moment. That discipline is rare. Most people speak to be heard, not to be understood. They talk to fill silence, afraid of what it might reveal. But silence reveals everything. It reveals intentions. It exposes insecurity. It makes people uncomfortable, not because it's empty, but because it forces authenticity. There's a certain kind of power in being the one who doesn't flinch, who doesn't rush to fill the quiet. People begin to wonder what you're thinking, why you're not responding, what you're holding back. And in that curiosity, in that anticipation, lies influence. Because once you have someone's curiosity, you have their attention, and once you have their attention, you can decide how to use it. That's what makes silence so dangerous to those who rely on chaos, manipulation, or distraction to maintain control. Silence cuts through noise like a blade. It creates tension, clarity, focus. In situations of conflict, silence can diffuse anger or escalate tension, depending on how you use it. It can serve as a mirror, forcing the other person to reflect on their words. Sometimes saying nothing speaks louder than defending yourself. Sometimes silence communicates, I won't dignify that with a response. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. You're not running from the moment, you're mastering it. You're choosing what deserves your attention and what doesn't. We live in a time where people fear silence. Social media encourages constant commentary. Every thought, every feeling, every mundane update is turned into a post, a story, a rant. But just because everyone is talking doesn't mean anyone is saying something valuable. And when everyone is shouting, the one who remains silent becomes magnetic. People lean in, they wonder why you're not participating, they question your silence, and that very curiosity becomes a form of control. Because now, the power dynamic has shifted, you're not reacting to the world. The world is reacting to you. Silence also gives you emotional clarity. In moments of disappointment, betrayal, or grief, silence allows you to process your emotions without external influence. You don't need to explain yourself to the world. You don't need to narrate your pain in real time. You can sit with it, understand it, and rise from it on your own terms. That's power. Because when you no longer seek validation or pity through your words, you regain ownership of your story. You decide how it ends and who gets to hear it. If anyone at all, there is strength in restraint, there is authority in patience, and silence teaches you both. It allows you to listen, not just to others, but to yourself, to your intuition, to what's really happening beneath the surface of a situation. Most people miss the truth because they're too busy trying to prove a point, but the one who remains silent often sees everything. And because they're not constantly explaining, defending, or convincing, they become unpredictable, and unpredictability, when rooted in calm awareness, becomes an incredible weapon. Silence isn't about disengaging from life, it's about engaging with it more intentionally. It's about knowing when to speak and when to wait. It's about controlling the narrative by controlling what you give away. And the less you give away, the more people pay attention when you finally choose to speak. That's what makes silence not just a virtue, but a weapon. Don't feed the algorithm, a warning that sounds almost poetic, but its implications are deeply real and profoundly urgent. In a digital age where every tap, click, scroll, and post becomes a piece of data, we are no longer just users of the internet. We are the product. The algorithm learns us, mirrors us, anticipates us. It rewards outrage, exaggerates trends, and subtly shapes how we think, feel, and behave. Every time we overshare, overexpose, or emotionally react online, we're not just communicating. We're feeding a machine designed to manipulate our attention and monetize our vulnerabilities. The algorithm thrives on emotion. It doesn't care whether what you feel is joy, grief, rage, or insecurity. All it needs is for you to feel something strongly enough to stay engaged. That's why heartbreak videos go viral. Why controversial opinions rise to the top. Why dramatic confessions, personal losses, and mental breakdowns are suddenly content. The more emotionally charged your post, the more visible it becomes. But visibility isn't the same as value, and attention isn't the same as respect. The algorithm knows this. It doesn't ask you for context or care about your well-being. It only knows how to optimize. When we feed the algorithm with every detail of our private lives, we begin to confuse expression with exposure. We think we're being vulnerable, honest, relatable, but often we're being consumed. Our pain becomes a performance. Our joy becomes a spectacle. Our lives become open tabs in someone else's browser. And the worst part, the algorithm doesn't just reflect who we are. It begins to shape who we become. It curates our feeds based on our reactions, subtly encouraging us to be more of what keeps others watching, liking, commenting. Suddenly, we're not sharing our truth. We're performing for approval. We're not growing. We're branding. There's an invisible pressure to stay relevant, to stay visible. The algorithm has trained us to believe that silence is death online, that if we're not posting, we're disappearing. So we start documenting everything. A thought becomes a tweet. A tear becomes a TikTok. A breakup becomes a multi-part story. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we stop living for ourselves and start living for the algorithm's approval. Our digital persona becomes louder than our real self. Our self-worth starts sinking with our engagement rate. But who are we when no one's watching? Who are we when there's nothing to post? Feeding the algorithm gives it power, not just over your content, but over your emotions, your identity, your habits. It rewards controversy more than clarity. It favors speed over depth. It prefers you to react before you reflect. That's how it wins, and that's why choosing not to feed it is one of the most powerful acts of rebellion in the digital world. When you pause before posting, when you choose silence over performance, when you share less instead of more, you break the cycle. You reclaim your narrative from a system designed to use it. There's a difference between sharing to connect and sharing to compete. The algorithm doesn't know the difference, but you do. You can feel it in your gut, that subtle anxiety after a post doesn't perform, that pull to turn something painful into content just so it feels useful, that nudge to reveal more than you're comfortable with because that's what gets rewarded. That is the algorithm conditioning you, and the moment you become aware of it is the moment you start to regain your power. You don't owe the internet your story. You don't have to turn every emotion into a post. You don't need to make your healing, your grief, or your growth a public exhibit. There's strength in privacy. There's dignity in boundaries. There's wisdom in choosing what stays offline. When you resist the urge to constantly broadcast your life, you're not withholding, you're preserving. You're telling the algorithm it doesn't own you. You're choosing presence over performance. The most impactful things in life often happen off-screen. The real healing, the real joy, the real evolution. They don't need applause to be real. They don't need metrics to be meaningful. You can live deeply, grow quietly, and still matter. In fact, you'll probably matter more because you're not performing for a system that doesn't care about you. You're living for yourself. You're writing your own story without asking an algorithm for permission to tell it. Not everyone deserves to know you. It sounds simple, even obvious, yet too many of us forget it in practice. We move through the world offering pieces of ourselves to anyone who shows a moment of interest. We spill our stories, our struggles, our secrets, hoping that being seen fully will bring us closer to others, will make us feel understood, will somehow prove we're real. But not all attention is connection, and not every listener is a safe place. The truth is, access to you is a privilege, not a public right. In a culture that glorifies openness and praises vulnerability as strength, we forget that strength also lies in discernment. Being vulnerable without boundaries isn't bravery, it's exposure. When you reveal everything to everyone, you dilute your power. You give people the ability to interpret your story without truly understanding your depth. You allow their projections, opinions, and assumptions to shape how your truth is perceived. And once that door is open, it's incredibly hard to close. Suddenly, your inner world is open for public commentary, and you're left trying to reclaim your peace from a place you never should have given it away. You are not required to explain yourself to those who haven't earned the right to understand you. You don't owe your background, your reasoning, your healing process to people who are only curious but not caring. Curiosity is not the same as compassion. Interest is not the same as investment. Some people just want your story so they can retell it. Some want your weakness to feel stronger. Some simply want entertainment. That doesn't make them evil, but it doesn't make them deserving either. We must stop confusing attention for intimacy. Just because someone listens doesn't mean they hear you. Just because someone looks doesn't mean they see you. True connection is rare, and it's earned slowly. Trust is not something you give away quickly. It's something that should be built through consistency, respect, and genuine care. Not everyone in your life will meet that standard, and that's okay. Your job is not to make everyone feel included in your emotional world. Your job is to protect the most sacred parts of yourself from those who haven't shown they can be trusted with them. When you start setting boundaries around who gets to know you, you'll begin to notice a shift. Some people will disappear, others will get offended. Some may accuse you of being distant, cold, or arrogant. That's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of their entitlement. They were never interested in you as a person. They were interested in what they could access. When that access is removed, they lose interest. Let them. You are not here to be available to everyone. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to protect your peace, and that means being selective. Being selective doesn't mean being closed off. It means being wise. It means learning that your worth isn't measured by how many people you impress or how many secrets you reveal. It means knowing that the most powerful parts of you are the ones kept private. Your dreams, your wounds, your values, these deserve protection. They deserve to grow in safe spaces, not under the scrutiny of those who haven't earned your trust. People often show you who they are through how they handle your truth. Some will honor it, some will exploit it. That's why not everyone should be given the chance. You don't have to test everyone. You don't have to gamble your vulnerability to see who stays and who runs. You can watch, listen, observe. People reveal their character in small ways. How they speak about others, how they handle disagreement, how they respond to boundaries. Pay attention. Protect yourself before you expose yourself. There's a certain calm that comes from being grounded in privacy. When you stop feeling the need to explain your every move, when you stop justifying your choices or narrating your life, you begin to regain your power. You move in silence, not out of fear, but out of strength. You become less reactive. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing closure from people who never had the capacity to give it to you in the first place. The most evolved people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who have learned the beauty of being known by few and loved deeply, rather than being known by many and misunderstood. You get to choose who has access to you. You get to decide who gets to see the real you, not based on how long they've known you or how loud they are, but based on their integrity, their loyalty, and their respect for your boundaries, because not everyone deserves to know you. And that's not cruel, that's wisdom. Mystery attracts respect. In a time where oversharing has become the norm and visibility is often mistaken for value, there's something quietly powerful about the person who doesn't reveal everything. The one who doesn't post every move, who doesn't narrate every emotion, who doesn't need validation to feel seen. They hold a presence that commands attention without ever demanding it. You don't know everything about them, and that's exactly what makes you want to know more. The unknown creates tension, and in that tension, respect begins to grow. We live in a world that encourages full exposure. Be real. They say, be vulnerable, tell your story. But when everything is revealed too quickly, nothing feels valuable. There's no journey for people to take with you, no layers to uncover, no depth to explore. When someone is too available, too visible, too explained, their energy starts to feel predictable, and predictability rarely inspires admiration. Mystery, on the other hand, invites curiosity. It makes people lean in. It makes people listen more carefully, observe more closely, speak more thoughtfully, because they sense there's more beneath the surface. Mystery doesn't mean being secretive for the sake of being difficult. It means knowing the value of what you carry. It's understanding that your story, your thoughts, your emotions, they are sacred, and not everyone deserves access to them. Mystery is rooted in self-respect. It's a form of emotional discipline. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it. That kind of confidence is magnetic. People respect what they cannot easily grasp because it forces them to engage with you on a deeper level. When someone doesn't reveal their every thought, they're not being evasive. They're being intentional. They're choosing their words with care. They're controlling the narrative instead of allowing the world to define them. That's power, and power handled with restraint always earns more respect than power flaunted. The loudest person in the room might get attention, but it's the quiet, composed one who gets remembered. Because while noise fades, presence leaves an imprint. Mystery also protects your boundaries. It creates space between you and the world. In that space, you get to grow without interference, heal without judgment, plan without pressure. When no one knows exactly what you're thinking or doing, no one can interrupt your process. You move without permission, you evolve without explanation, and because you haven't overexposed yourself, you don't owe anyone updates. You're free from the invisible leash of public expectation. That freedom allows you to be more honest with yourself, more connected to your purpose, and more selective with your energy. There's also an undeniable dignity in the mysterious. Think about the people you admire the most, not just for their accomplishments, but for their presence. Chances are, they're the ones who reveal only what's necessary. They don't chase attention, yet they have it. They don't overshare, yet they're trusted. They're not loud, but they're heard. That's because mystery makes room for imagination. It invites people to project their highest thoughts onto you. Not because you manipulated them, but because you gave them just enough to wonder. In relationships, mystery can be a form of respect. It creates anticipation. It shows that you're not desperate to be understood in one conversation, one moment, or one post. You allow people the time and space to truly get to know you if they've earned it. You reveal yourself in layers, not because you're hiding, but because you understand the value of unfolding slowly. That kind of depth demands more than surface-level attention. It demands effort, time, and care. And anything that requires effort is inherently more respected. When you maintain mystery, you also protect your peace. You're less reactive, less consumed by the need to explain yourself. You stop defending every decision, justifying every feeling, clarifying every action. You allow your life to speak for itself. You let your presence do the talking. And when you finally choose to speak, people listen, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect, because they know your words are not thrown away, they're chosen. They carry weight, and so do you. In the end, mystery is not about being aloof, it's about being sovereign. It's about choosing silence when it's tempting to speak, choosing stillness when it's easier to perform, choosing privacy when exposure feels like currency. That choice to withhold, to protect, to remain unknown. It doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable. Oversharing is not connection. In a digital world where everyone seems to be speaking all the time, where feelings are turned into captions and trauma becomes trending content, we've started to confuse exposure with intimacy. We assume that telling more means being real, that revealing everything is a sign of closeness. But true connection isn't built on how much we share, it's built on why we share and with whom. Oversharing might feel like openness in the moment, but more often, it leaves us feeling emptier, not more connected. There's a growing pressure to be transparent, to constantly narrate what we're going through. Vulnerability is praised, but not always in its purest form. What should be a sacred expression of trust becomes performative when done without boundaries. Sharing your raw moments online can sometimes be mistaken as strength, but if it's driven by the need for external validation, it becomes a transaction. You give a piece of your heart hoping for likes, comments, or recognition. And when the feedback isn't what you expected, you're left with disappointment, not relief. Because what you really wanted was connection, not attention. Real connection is intentional. It happens when you feel seen and safe, not just when you feel heard. Oversharing skips the part where trust is built slowly. It leaps into intimacy without invitation, and when there's no foundation of trust, what you're left with isn't closeness, it's discomfort. The person listening might not know what to do with your story. They might feel overwhelmed or worse, indifferent. And then you're left wondering if you said too much, gave too much, revealed too much of yourself to someone who wasn't ready or willing to hold it. Oversharing also comes from a place of emotional urgency. You want to be understood, to feel less alone, to release the weight you're carrying. But when that urge isn't guided by reflection, it can backfire. You might say things you didn't really mean, things you haven't fully processed, or things that weren't meant to be spoken aloud yet. And once they're out there, especially online, you can't take them back. Your moment of emotional release becomes permanent content, a snapshot of you that the world gets to interpret, judge, and revisit long after you've grown past it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be known. That desire is deeply human, but not everyone deserves to know the most vulnerable parts of you. Not every space is a safe space, not every audience is empathetic, and not every moment is the right time to share. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to pause, to ask, why am I sharing this? What am I hoping to receive, and will this actually bring me closer to someone, or just more visible to everyone? That moment of pause is where self-respect begins. We often overshare because we're afraid of silence, afraid that if we're not constantly explaining ourselves, we'll be misunderstood. But sometimes silence is stronger than explanation. Sometimes it's more powerful to hold something sacred than to hand it over to strangers. Connection doesn't require you to bear everything. It requires you to be honest, yes, but also thoughtful. True intimacy is built on trust, not volume. It deepens over time, through mutual effort, through shared experience, not through instant disclosure. Oversharing can also become a way of controlling how we're perceived. If we expose our flaws first, maybe no one else can use them against us. If we turn our pain into a performance, maybe we'll seem brave instead of broken. But that's not connection, that's strategy, and the people who are truly meant to connect with you don't need the performance, they just need your presence, your truth in its simplest, quietest form. The parts of you that are unfiltered, not because they're dramatic, but because they're real. There's strength in being selective, in choosing who gets to see you, in understanding that not everyone has earned the right to witness your softness, your struggles, your depth. That kind of discernment is not cold, it's wise. It protects your energy, your boundaries, your dignity. It allows connection to happen naturally, not forcefully. It makes space for genuine relationships to grow, ones that are based on mutual care rather than emotional exhibition. In a world that rewards constant sharing, choosing to keep parts of yourself private is an act of quiet rebellion. It says, I am not here to perform my pain for you. It says, I am not more real just because I'm more exposed. It says, I know that connection isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And that kind of wisdom will always lead you to deeper, truer relationships than anything built on oversharing ever could.